So the report that we're launching tonight, Mark said a lot about it already, but it's basically about a sort of a worrying and a widening construction knowledge gap that we've identified. And it echoes a lot of what Mark has said. I think I'm right in saying that is the last slide rather than the first one. I only know that because if it was the first one, it would tell you that if you're a tweeter, you could be tweeting under the hashtag construction knowledge. So I'm sure you all will. There we go, that's better. So I'm going to start off with a little bit of context. So the construction industry is becoming more complicated. I guess that is something that we probably all agree about, but it's actually quite difficult to put your finger on what that means or to find a metric that kind of captures it. So I've been looking for a long time, and I found two slides that paint quite an alarming picture. So this graph shows you the number of live British standards. And you can see they've accelerated pretty continuously since the Second World War. And even recently, the millennium, there were about 22,000 British standards, and now there are 39,000. So that's an increase of 80% in the last 17 years. I don't know if buildings have become 80% more complicated, but there's an even more bizarre and alarming slide, which is how long do British standards last before they're withdrawn? So you can see in the 1960s and 70s, they were lasting 20 or 25 years. By the millennium, they were down to about 10 years. And now, according to BSI's figures, British standards are lasting about a year, which is staggering. And you wonder how we're supposed to keep up with this rate of change. We rely on the British standards very heavily in the construction industry, so the regulations are filled with British standards, specifications are filled with British standards. And if we look at, a fire, for example, which is a tragically topical subject at the moment, approved document B of the building regulations refers to 99 British standards. So just one of those, BS 9999, is 416 pages long, and it costs £380. You have to buy the thing. So you have to ask, does the whole of the industry actually have the resource to keep up to date with all of that knowledge, to buy it, to read it, to understand it, to apply it, to check it, importantly? Probably the biggest guys do. They have the resources to do that. But 99.8% of the businesses in the construction industry employ fewer than 50 people. So have they really got the resources to do that? I'd argue we're probably giving them an impossible task. So the construction knowledge framework, there's more than standards in it. There's legislation, regulations, policy, and so on that define what it is that we need to do and set the baseline for performance in the industry. And that framework needs to be comprehensive, it needs to be accessible, it needs to be usable. Otherwise, the industry as a whole just won't perform. So the knowledge creators, these are the government classifications for who are the different organisations that create knowledge. And it's a diverse but actually quite a small group that decide what knowledge is going to be created, who's going to have access to it, and what they have to do to get access to it. Unfortunately for these guys, the internet has come along and it has blown their business models wide open. So the first website was published in 1991. The billionth website, that's a billionth, was published in 2014. So we're not just anymore going to these guys for our knowledge. Unfortunately for them, now everybody is a publisher. So we're not just reading their journals, their refereed articles, their textbooks. We're also going to Google and we're searching for things and we're using whatever we find first, whether it's right or wrong. So the industry has been a bit slow to catch up with this change, and in fact, some bits of the industry are pulling away from publishing because it just isn't profitable anymore. So the I generation expect to get everything for free, and they won't even pay a few pounds for a piece of knowledge. So they're Googling things, and they are not going to the people that the government think are creating knowledge. So in the midst of all this change, we've got to ask, is the knowledge framework for the construction industry fit for purpose? Because if it isn't, the industry will not perform. So it turns out that we, bizarrely, are in a very good position to help answer that question. So Designing Buildings Wiki gets 3.5 million users a year, and that is more than any other industry website by a long way. And because those users are cross-discipline, they're from every bit of the industry, their behavior is representative of the industry as a whole. So it's not perfectly representative, but it's probably the best sample group that anybody has got right now. So what we've done is we've taken 6 million bits of data about how our users access knowledge, how they share it, how they create it, and we've tortured that data, and we've used some new analytical techniques, new visualization techniques, and we've produced some never-before-seen insights into construction industry knowledge. I hope. Yeah, we have. So this is what construction industry knowledge looks like, and I don't think anything like this has ever been seen before. So we've got what this image is showing you. There's about 30 different subject categories on there. And the proximity of those categories to each other shows you how closely they're related as subjects. And the size and the color shows you how much is written about those different subject areas. So you see here we've got a cluster of, I think I can point. Yeah, there we go. Appointments, procurement, and contracts and payment. And here we've got a little cluster of sort of legal subject areas. Here we've got a cluster of policy subject areas. But the main thing that we see from this is that over here we've got what I'm going to call academic sorts of subjects. So we've got theory, research and innovation, history, projects and case studies. That is what the industry is focusing its effort on writing about. The other noticeable thing about this, as Mark already mentioned, is that BIM up here is completely isolated from the whole of the rest of the industry. It doesn't appear to have any links to any other subject. So that's what the data is telling us that construction knowledge looks like. This is what the industry is writing about. The next slide, hopefully, shows us what the industry is reading about. So it's quite a different picture. I'm just going to run you through that transition again. This is what the industry is spending all of its resources writing about. But this is what people are actually reading. So I can actually let that run as a slightly hypnotic GIF. There we go. So what you're seeing is that there's a massive shift from the subjects on the right, from the academic subjects, from theory, from research, from innovation, projects and case studies, the things that the industry loves to write about. And there's a massive shift towards what I'm going to call project subjects, so appointments, procurement, contracts, payments, construction management. This is what people want to actually read about. So what you're looking at is the knowledge gap. It's the difference between what people want and what they're actually getting. In a nutshell, what the data seems to be telling us is that people want, and it seems pretty obvious when you think about it, but people want knowledge about the things they're actually doing day by day, about the actual activities they're working on. They're not really quite so interested in the more ethereal things which may not directly relate to what they're doing now. So it sounds obvious, and it's, as Mark says, a lot of what we're showing you, it's not surprising particularly. They're things we've all sort of intuitively imagined already, but seeing it in data and being able to tell you exactly what the difference is, the data backs up what we've all really thought. So we've also looked at how long people spend reading different subject areas. So very, very broadly, the project subjects here, the how to do things in red, are relatively popular. The academic subjects here, not so popular. The other thing we can see about this slide is that there's a category in the sort of the top half there, which is broadly the sort of legal subjects. So they're things which, whilst not all of them are popular necessarily, they're very complicated and they take a long time to understand. So people spend a lot of time reading them. The other thing about how long people spend reading things is that on average, across all subject areas, people spend about 3 minutes on any subject. So if you just think about that for a minute, if the industry isn't able to tell people what they need to know in 3 minutes, they're going to go and look somewhere else. So with the internet, that's very simple. You do it yourselves. I'm not telling you anything you don't already know because you do it yourselves. If you don't find it quickly, you click back, you go back to the search results, and you look somewhere else. The industry's got to get to grips with this very quickly because it's going to get much worse. This year was the first year that most Google searches were done on a mobile device. So that's people on the move, looking at a very small screen. So if we bury critical information in a 400-page report, we shouldn't really be surprised if the iGeneration on a mobile phone don't find it. And so we shouldn't really be surprised if they make mistakes. So we've then burrowed down into who are the people that are using this knowledge. You can see there's a very clear gender gap there. So we get about twice as much activity from men as we do from women. But interestingly, that is only true after about the age of 25. So in the early 20s, the proportion of men and women is almost equal. And it's only after that that there's a sharp decline. And interestingly, this picture is better than the industry as a whole. So for the industry as a whole, women make up about 15 to 20%. We're seeing more like a third. So all of these things may be good signs for the future. We can also burrow down in even more detail to what the differences are in the subject matters that men and women read about. They're very broadly the same. So you can see there's this interest from men and women about the kind of the project subject areas, the how to do things subjects. And there's broad similarity. We can look specifically at where there are differences. So here, the red subjects are subjects that women prefer to men, and the green subjects are the subjects that men prefer to women. And the ones in the middle are broadly gender neutral. So the very popular subjects are the ones in the middle, both men and women like them. On the far left here, we've got subjects that women tend to prefer compared to men. So subjects like theory, case law, history. And on the far right, we have the subjects that men seem to prefer compared to women. So news, BIM, publications and reports. And we could use that information to target knowledge creation, to try, for example, to encourage those younger women to stay in the industry by creating specific targeted knowledge that we know suits what they're looking for. If you look at the age profile of people that are using knowledge, there's a massive disparity with about 4 times as much activity from people who are under 45 as from people who are over 45. And again, that doesn't reflect the overall makeup of the industry. So the industry as a whole, about 35 to 40% of people are over 45, whereas here we're only seeing about 20% of people are over 45. So there's a big disparity, which is a little difficult to explain. We can also look at what the differences in the subject areas are. So we're looking at the 65 plus age group there compared to the 25 to 34s. And again, you broadly see that there's still interest from both groups in the project's subjects because we all need to know them. We all need to know how to do what we're doing day to day. But there are some very marked differences here. So if you look at the circle at the top there, it seems that the 65 plus group have no interest whatsoever in BIM. Also looking off to the right, you can see that they have very little interest in research, innovation, education. They have a lot more interest in planning permission, regulations, and health and safety. So they're not coming across as the most interesting group. But again, we could use this knowledge to target what we do, to try and focus information on specific groups that need to know it. So this is very useful for people that are getting into knowledge creation now. The final thing we looked at was where are people? And unsurprisingly, most of the activity comes from the urban centres of the UK. What is a bit more difficult to explain is quite the amount of focus on London. So 13% of the UK population lives in London. 22% of construction output is from London. But in terms of knowledge use, so people that are reading construction knowledge, it's 34%, which is vastly higher than the number of people that live there. If you crunch the maths, that actually tells you that there is 3 times as much knowledge consumption per capita in London than there is in the rest of the UK. And again, that is very difficult to explain. So what can we conclude from all of this data? Oh, we may never know. Yes, there we are. I think the thing that has occurred to us as we've been going through this process is that it seems that this is the first comprehensive study of construction industry knowledge that has been done at all. So up until now, the industry has been operating blind, just kind of hoping for the best, that the knowledge that everybody needs is out there and that it's accessible and that people are accessing it and that they're applying it. There doesn't seem to be very much collaboration or coordination in the knowledge creation that does happen. So there are massive duplication of effort in some areas. If you take something like CDM, every organisation in the country has been writing lots and lots and lots about CDM, and it's all exactly the same. Whereas if you take the more practical subjects, there are gaping holes. So if you want to try afterwards Googling, for example, which way up should you lay a brick, you'll be a bit horrified by the answers that you come up with. And it's not industry knowledge. These are people on forums telling each other the wrong answer. And I'll share a story with you, which I won't tell you who it was by, but we sat down with a major organisation and asked them what particular bit of research they were working on at the moment. When they told us, and when we Googled it, they didn't come up anywhere in the results whatsoever. Didn't come up on page 1, didn't come up on page 2, didn't come up on page 3, even though they spent an enormous amount of money on this. Top of the search results was the Mothers Network. I can't remember what it's called. Mumsnet. Because there are a couple of mothers on Mumsnet talking about this subject, asking each other how you should do it, and that's the answer that you get if you look on Google. So the industry has got a focus on creating knowledge in very classical research subjects. And that is largely because it's a historical entrenched funding model where enormous amount of money is pumped into basically universities, top down, in order to pay specialist researchers to do really what they were already doing anyway. But it's top-down research. It's not driven from the bottom up. It's not demand-driven. And it doesn't really have an impact on the ground. So what the industry is doing, it's putting an enormous amount of resource into making the top 1% of the industry a little bit better. And it's leaving the other 99% of the industry to fend for itself. So in the report, we're making 6 recommendations for how we can tackle this. And a lot of it I've already touched on, but it's largely about creating knowledge about the things that people actually want knowledge created about and in a format that they actually want, which sounds obvious, but right now that isn't happening. And also targeting that knowledge, so we can target knowledge to encourage people, like, for example, young women stay in the industry. We can target knowledge to try and encourage participation from the regions. We can target knowledge to try and integrate BIM into the industry better, now that we know what it looks like and where the gaps are. The most important recommendation is the last one, which is that the industry really has got to coordinate. It's got to pull itself together and organise, and it's got to start looking at this whole landscape piecemeal. So we've got to look at knowledge as a whole. We've got to look at what's out there at the moment, where are the gaps, who is best placed to fill those gaps, how should it be done, how will it be resourced, because maybe it isn't the current funding model, maybe it's not researchers that we need, maybe it's practitioners that we need to fill this knowledge gap, and practitioners have day jobs, so we need a different model to reward them for doing something. I think critically, and I can't stress this but enough, if there is vital industry information, it has to be freely available. The idea that we've got important safety information that is in a 400-page report that you've got to pay £380 for, that is one of 99 standards and one of 17 building regulations, is just ridiculous. And if we carry on like that, we shouldn't be surprised really when there are tragic errors.